Greetings, everybody. Laszlo Montgomery back with you again. This is part 5 in a pretty long series covering the history of Chinese philosophy. I thank you for fitting the CHP into your listening lineup. Before we get started, I wanted to interject a quick word about the Jesuits and their role in bringing Chinese philosophy to the West. They learned early on about the 9 classics that would later be called the Si Shu and the Wu Jing, the 4 books and the 5 classics. And the Jesuits learned early in their intel-gathering mission, late 16th, early 17th centuries, that these books, like the Bible, were ancient and very sacred texts, and they poured all their industry, scholarship, religious devotion, and intelligence into trying to translate them and figure these classics out. They figured mastery of these classic texts might hold the key for the Jesuits in drawing parallels between Confucianism and their Catholic faith, and winning the Chinese over to their side using the good old comparison method, showing their potential converts, you see, same ideas. Matteo Ricci got the translation process going, and later in 1687, Jesuits Prospero Intorchetta, together with Philippe Couplet, published the Life and Works of Confucius in Latin, and this Latin version acted like a Rosetta Stone that allowed for further translations of Confucian and Taoist classics to be made into all the major languages of Europe. And good timing, too. This all got rolling right on the eve of the Age of Enlightenment. All of those philosophic and literary greats of that age in Europe read and were familiar with Confucius through this work by Intorchetta and Couplet. Thanks to the work of the Jesuits during the 18th century, European intellectuals got to feast on Chinese culture for the first time. And Confucius, he was an instant hit. There were others besides Kongzi walking the streets of China during this age of 100 schools. One of the more amusing ones were all these so-called Sophists. Sophistry, by definition, is the use of fallacious arguments made with the intention of deceiving someone. Language and writing had come far enough by the time of Kongzi that other clever thinkers emerged who were wizards at taking words and twisting their meaning and applying arguments that solved nothing and confounded everyone. This group of philosophers, of which there were many later on, were classified in the Zhou Dynasty as the school of names, the Mingjia. Paradoxical conclusions were their stock in trade. The most famous early example of these sophists would have to be Deng Xi, China's first lawyer. He's called that, but that's not documented so far as I know. He's also credited with being China's founding father of logic. He lived from more or less 545 to 501 BCE, which would make him contemporary with Confucius. Back then, you had people like Deng Xi, who for a fee defended clients in matters of civil dispute. He was a minor official in the state of Zheng in modern-day Henan. The Zhuozhuan points out that his claim to fame was a liberal penal code that he introduced. Deng Xi and these others who followed him always figured out ways to win for their clients in these many civil disputes. In Deng Xi's day, as in our day as well, these lawyers, advocates, or whatever you want to call them, came up with all kinds of clever ways to, ignore the spirit of the law and focus only instead on the names and actualities which could be picked apart and debated from a number of angles. In his day, Deng Xi was not regarded highly and was considered a troublemaker. One day he argued for one thing, and the next day he'd take a contrarian position for another client, arguing both sides of the law. His cleverness later on put him on the wrong side of Duke Xian of Zheng, who ruled 513 to 501 BCE, and the Duke had Deng Xi executed. A nice illustration of Deng Xi at his best might be this signature story that comes to us straight from the Liu Shi Chunqiu, Master Liu's Spring and Autumn Annals. It goes like this. Somebody was sailing their boat, making their way down the Wei River, when they came upon a man floating face down in the water. The captain of the boat went and fished the body out of the river. Inquiries were made, and the one who found the body learned the family of the drowned man. Had quite a lot of money. So he asked for an exorbitant amount as a reward before he agreed to turn over the body. The grieving family at once sought out Deng Xi for advice, and the philosopher told them, "Don't worry, the price will come down. He can only sell the body to you. Who else is going to want it?" And then, wouldn't you know it, the same day later on, the man in possession of the unfortunate drowned victim also sought out Deng Xi for advice on how to handle the situation. And Deng Xi told him, there's no need to negotiate. Hold your price. You're the only one they could recover the body from. Get the picture? Deng Xi and his ilk, they were just one of so many thinkers who exploded onto the scene in China, mostly between the 6th to the 3rd centuries BCE. Confucius did not like these guys from the Mingjia, the school of names. I already mentioned the story when he sentenced a man to death once for pulling these kinds of stunts, manipulating words to incite the masses. Well, as we'll see later on, Confucianism all sounds nice and ideal, but not everyone thought that way. And the Confucianists always had stiff competition with others who tried to muscle their way into the pavilions of power, the Taoists and the Buddhists most famously. The great sage certainly got a heck of a drubbing during the Cultural Revolution, and starting in 1973, Kongzi got his very own political campaign. Pi Lin Pi Kong criticized Confucius and Lin Biao, and that lasted for 3 years. And he also serves as one of the internationally recognized iconic symbols of Chinese culture. Although it's called one of China's 3 religions, Confucianism is not a religion and has no deity. It's an entirely secular ideology. It's nothing like a religion in the sense of, say, Christianity. Well, beginning in the Han, Kongzi was held up by some as a godhead-type figure, but it wasn't like in the Judeo-Christian sense. The Zhou Dynasty deity was known as Shangdi. This was later replaced in the Zhou with the idea of Tian, or heaven, being the supreme deity who was a moral force and dependent on humans to manifest its will. As I mentioned a bit ago, from Confucianism developed this Chinese tradition of scholarship and love of learning. Later on, after the Han Dynasty is established, learning will become an entire industry that provided a conduit for people to better themselves and exercise that innate desire to achieve. No greater glory could come to a common villager than to see their son pass the civil service exams and attain a rank in officialdom. Confucian learning became the greatest chance one had to go somewhere. Not in Confucius's lifetime, that is, but later on. But as I indicated, the entire Confucian system and ethic had this built-in mechanism that kept women locked out of the whole system. And for this reason, we could only speculate how much greatness and achievement was lost throughout the ages by only providing a path to success for 50% of the gene pool. And many 19th and 20th century Chinese writers, thinkers, and statesmen would later point to Confucianism as the guilty culprit for holding the nation back all these centuries. The ideology was accused of being too restricting, too inward-looking. It abhorred humankind's spirit of adventure. The ultimate goal seemed to be the never-ending quest for a kind of walled garden where all outside influences were kept where they belong, on the outside. This was certainly true in the case of the decades following the Industrial Revolution. And after the foreigners came in droves during the 19th century and ran roughshod over Chinese institutions and sensibilities, a lot of intellectuals pointed at Confucius and said, if it wasn't for him, we wouldn't be in this situation. You know, when you read all about these Confucian philosophers, Mengzi, Xunzi most notably, you can see all Master Kong called for, besides reciprocity, do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. His main message was human decency, and he gave plenty of examples of what he meant. And as for rulers, what was so bad about rulers who were upright, moral, and engaged deliberately and with great sincerity all the ceremonies of state and setting an example for the people under their rule? Kongzi said, find this person, put him on the throne, and follow him. And because Kongzi showed 6 examples of such people, from Yao all the way to the Duke of Zhou, well, no one could say such a sage ruler didn't exist. And remember from last episode, the word Confucianism. It's a Western term. In Chinese, Confucianism is called Rujia, Ru meaning scholar. This school of thought encompasses more than just Confucius. It also includes all the commentaries everyone made who followed Master Kong. This is all grouped under the Rujia or Ru school umbrella. As we'll see in a later episode, with the passing of Confucius in 479 BCE, China will percolate on a high setting for 258 years before Qin Shi Huang vanquishes the last of the warring states and established China's first imperial dynasty, the Qin. We'll look at those 2.5 centuries later on and track the progress of Confucian thought as his disciples start to spin their magic. We'll also examine the impact that the first Qin emperor had on Confucianism and everyone else who wasn't related to the state ideology of legalism. We'll look at all that too. So much more to go. Coming up next, we'll look at more Ru school philosophers such as Mengzi, Mozi, Xunzi, then see what happens to Chinese philosophy in the Qin and the Han dynasties. Okay, today's a short one. Class dismissed a little early. This is Laszlo Montgomery signing off from Southern California. Thanks for listening, and please consider coming back again next time for another exciting episode of the China History Podcast.